Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to continue our way through Pharr's Homeric Greek, a book for beginners, but descend deep into the depths of the complex grammar of Greek by looking at the various schema for conditional sentences. Now, what is a conditional sentence? A condition is a supposition on which a statement is based. A conditional sentence commonly consists of two clauses. The protasis, that is, the conditional or subordinate clause expressing a supposed or assumed case, the marker for which is if, and then the apodosis, the conclusion or principal clause expressing what follows if the condition is realized. The truth or fulfillment of the conclusion depends on the truth or fulfillment of the conditional clause. So, protasis has its name from protasis, literally stretching forward, that which is put forward, in logic, a premise, and apodosis is from apodosis, literally a giving back or return, i.e., the resuming or answering clause. The protasis usually precedes, but may follow the apodosis. So those two words are kind of tongue trickers, protasis and apodosis, but hopefully you will get used to them. Now, your protasis is introduced by a, epsilon iota, if. Homer also has alpha iota, which is an aeolic and Doric form. When occurring with a subjunctive mood, a commonly takes on, or in epic, you have a ke, or a ken. Now, in Attic Greek, there are three different forms of aeon, depending on contraction: epsilon alpha nu, eta nu, or alpha long alpha nu. And you can see any one of these three forms, and one just has to get used to them. In New Testament Greek, however, aeon only means just quite simply if, never if ever, because by the time you get to the later Greek of the New Testament, all these fancy subtleties and variations that I'm treating here have pretty much disappeared. So, looking forward to lines 59 through 61, our first conditional clauses in the Iliad, we see two instances of a, atra ide nun hame palem plactentas oio, ops aponos de sein, e ken danaton ge bugoimen, e de homu polemos te damai kai loimos arkai us. So e ken danatoi ge bugoimen and e de homu polemos te dame kai loimos arkai us. And so by the end of this lecture, you have a sense of what's going on in those two clauses. Okay, so an understanding of the conditional sentences of Attic Greek is a much more complex affair than that of, say, the very simple schema that one finds in Latin. What you find in Attic is that you have three different classes: present, past, and future, and then within each of those present, past, and future, you have three subclasses. So you have present simple conditions, present unreal conditions, present general conditions, and likewise among past conditions you have those same simple, unreal, and general. And then with regard to future time, you have again three different distinctions: more vivid, less vivid, and emotional. Now the key here is ultimately understanding what tenses and moods go into the apodosis and protasis of each of these 9 different groupings. And, Smythe's overall account of conditions runs 20 pages because he's covering all the various twists and turns of it. And that's something you'll explore in time and that we'll explore together. However, for now, it's more than enough to get your mind around these 9 different types and begin to get a growing sense of the moods and tenses that occur in each of the 2 clauses. Now, as I said, the situation in New Testament Greek is much simpler, and for that, if you're only a New Testament Greek reader, you should consult the grammar of Blas and de Brunner, sections 360, and then sections 371 through 376, and he'll tell you everything you need to know about the simplification of conditional forms from this great complexity of Attic to the relative simplicity of the New Testament forms. Okay, so let's begin. As I said, you have, of the present and past conditions, you have simple, unreal, and general. So we'll begin with the present and past simple conditions. Simple, present, or past conditions simply state a supposition with no implication as to its reality or probability. The Protasis has the indicative. The Apodosis has commonly the indicative, but also any other form of the simple sentence appropriate to the thought. So the examples here: if you do this, you do well. If you did this, you did well. Etauta poes kalos poes, etauta epoiesas, kalos epoiesas. Okay, so these simple conditions, this form of condition, corresponds to the logical formula: if this is so, then that is so. If this is not so, then that is not so. If A then equals B, then C equals D. The truth of the conclusion depends solely on the truth of the condition, which is not implied in any way. In these conditions, something is supposed to be true only in order to draw the consequence that something else is true. So these are our simple present and past conditions, and you just have indicative mood in each limb as you need it to express with the time that you're interested in. Now, next category are the general conditions. What's a general condition? General conditions refer indefinitely to any act or series of acts that are supposed to occur or to have occurred at any time, and without any implication as to fulfillment. The if clause has the force of if ever, whenever, and the conclusion expresses a repeated or habitual or general truth. So, for instance, whenever my car gets dirty, I take it to the car wash. That's an example of a general condition. So how about the specifics? Let's look at the present general conditions. Present general conditions have, in the Protasis, ean with the subjunctive, and in the Apodosis, the present indicative or any equivalent to the present indicative. Ean tauta poes se epaino. If ever you do this, I always praise you. The conclusion holds true of any time and of all time. So, to take a literary example from Euripides, Alcestis, line 671, if death draws near, no one wishes to die. Ein dengus el te thanatos, udes bouletai ne skein. Now, as for past general conditions have, In the Protasis, a with the Optative, but in the Apodosis, the imperfect indicative or its equivalent. E tauta poioes se epenun. If ever you did this, I always praised you. This optative is sometimes called the iterative optative. So to have take a literary example, edetis kai antepoi eutus etetneke. If anyone objected, immediately he was killed. Edetis kai antepoi eutus etetneke. From Thucydides, Book 8. Okay, so next we have the category of unreal conditions, present and past. In the present and past unreal conditions, the protasis implies that the supposition cannot or could not be realized because it is contrary to a known fact. The apodosis states what would be or would have been the result if the condition were or had been realized. So if you're talking about an unreal condition in present time, the imperfect the imperfect tense is used, and the imperfect indicative is used, and it refers to present time or sometimes to a continued or habitual state, past act or state. The imperfect may be conative. It may express what one was trying to do. So, e tauta epoies, kalos an epoies. So the implied opposite is the present, ala ou poies, but you were not doing this, or the imperfect, ala ou poies, but you were not doing this. The imperfect of past time emphasizes the continuance of the action. So here in the apodosis, we have the imperfect with on. That is a very common use of the imperfect with on to reflect, or with a past tense, to reflect an unreal circumstance. Okay? So if you were doing this, you would have been doing well. The present, in the past unreal conditions, however, you see the aorist. If you had done this, you would have done well. E tauta epoiesas, kalos an epoiesas. And so here, again, the apodosis, we see a past tense with on. And your implied opposite is the aorist, al uk epoiesas, but you did not do this. Now, the rare pluperfect refers to an act completed in past or present time, or to the state following such a completion. And you can check that out for yourself. It's my 2306. So finally, we move to future conditions. And future conditions set forth suppositions, the fulfillment of which is still undecided. There are two main forms of future condition. That is, the more vivid future condition and the less vivid future conditions. And then a variety of the first class, that is, a variety of the more vivid future conditions is the emotional future. So really, you could just say there are three types: more vivid, less vivid, and emotional, as we'll see. So, what's the difference between these three? Or more specifically, between the two main classes? The difference between the more vivid future and the less vivid future, like the difference between if I shall do this and if I should do this, depends on the mental attitude of the speaker. With a vivid future, the speaker sets forth a thought as prominent and distinct in his mind, and for any one or more of various reasons. Thus, he may, and generally does, regard the conclusion as more likely to be realized. But even an impossible or dreaded result may be expressed by this form if the speaker chooses to picture the result vividly and distinctly. The more vivid future is thus used whenever the speaker clearly desires to be graphic, impressive, emphatic, and to anticipate a future result with the distinctness of the present. So that's when you're going to see aeon with the subjunctive. So here we go. More vivid conditions have in the protasis aeon with the subjunctive, and in the apodosis the future indicative or any other form referring to future time. Ean tauta poies, kalos poieses. If you do this, you will do well. So we have a wonderful literary example from Plato's Protagoras, 310a, where Socrates says, "And I will be grateful to you if you listen," and his companion replies on behalf of his friends as well, "And indeed, we will be grateful to you if you speak." So, Socrates, "Kai karen ge esomai, ean akuete," and then the companion, "Kai main kai heme soy, ean leges." So we see the aeon in both clauses, and then akuete, and then leges are subjunctives. So aeon with the subjunctive is the signal that we're dealing with a more future vivid condition. Now, the less vivid future deals with suppositions less distinctly conceived and of less immediate concern to the speaker, mere assumed or imaginary cases. This is a favorite construction in Greek and is often used in stating suppositions that are merely possible and often impossible. But the form of the condition does not itself imply an expectation of the speaker that the conclusion may possibly be realized. The difference between the two forms, therefore, is not an inherent difference between probable realization in the one case and possible realization in the other. The same thought may often be expressed in either form without any essential difference in meaning. The only difference is, therefore, often that of temperament, tone, or style. So these less vivid conditions, they are should-would conditions, and they're often called that, should-would conditions. And in these conditions, you have the protasis marked by a with the optative, and the apodosis on with the optative. So, e tauta poioies, kalos an poioies. If you should do this, you would do well. And a wonderful literary example where Plato Socrates foreshadows the Christian ethic. In the Gorgias 469c, he says, "But if it were necessary either to do wrong or to be wronged, I would prefer to suffer wrong rather than to inflict it. E danakai on e, adikain e adikestai, eloimen an malon, adikestai e adikain." I'll read that again simply because it's so beautiful. E danakai on e, adikain e adikestai, eloimen an malon, adikestai e adikain. Okay. Now, Homer has freedom, as he often does, and in less vivid conditions, he can have the protasis be eke, an, with the same sense as the optative with a alone. So, this use of eke, where attic would have to just have the optative alone, is exclusively Homeric. And it's exactly actually what we see in line 60 of Book 1 of the Iliad, where Achilles says, E ken thanaton ge pugoimen, if death indeed we should escape or will escape. If we're going to escape death, okay, I think we better get the hell out of Dodge. Here we see Aken and Pugoimen in this expressing this Homeric, less vivid condition. But we'll see that you'll note that we have this notion of futurity in the what's the Apodosis, and we'll account for that in a second once we get to these future conditions. The last of them, and that's the future emotional conditions. So emotional future conditions, when the Protasis expresses strong feeling, the future indicative with A is commonly used instead of an with the subjunctive, and may often be rendered by shall. The Protasis commonly suggests something undesired or feared or intended independently of the speaker's will. The Apodosis commonly conveys a threat, a warning, or an earnest appeal to the feelings. So we see in line 61, E de homu polemos te damai kai lo mois akaius. This dama is a future, actually, from Damasdo. E de homu polemos te dama kai loimos akaius. If at the same time war and plague are to overwhelm the Achaeans, atre ide dun hama palem plak thentes oi o aps aponoste sen. I think at son of Atreus, that we, struck as we are, must or shall have to return home backwards. If E ken thanaton ge pugoimen, if we would escape death, and if indeed war and plague are to fall upon us. So it's interesting to see this combination of what one would call an emotional Protasis with a less vivid Protasis in these two clauses that, in this case follow, because as we see the Protasis can follow the Apodosis, and it does here. So, as I said, Smythe covers these conditional clauses over 20 pages, so it is there's a lot of curves and turns in this, and we see them here, but this is pretty, as straightforward as anything in Greek when we get to this depth of the grammar can be. Okay. So finally, Smythe has at 2356 an explanation of the various cases where the optative with on, the potential optative, may be used in the Apodosis. And this is just an example of the fine slicing he does. And I'm not even going to go through this. I'll just refer you to this section, 2356, where he shows places where you can have a potential optative with on in the Apodosis. Okay, so back to this main chart. This is the bottom line of what you have to begin to get your mind around. And as I said, you have present, past, and future time conditions, and three classes of each. In the present and the past, simple, unreal, general, simple, unreal, general. But in the future, more vivid, less vivid, and emotional. And you'll slowly but surely get to know the tenses and moods that occur in the Protasis and Apodosis of each. As far as New Testament grammar is concerned, here are the sections from Blas and de Brunner, 360, 371 through 376, that explain the simplified state of affairs you have in New Testament Greek. But the real reason why, this is important in itself, but its importance is escalated by the fact that you have this phenomenon which I call the Great Correspondence. And this is the fact that as somebody says in section 2561. The correspondence in construction between the common forms of conditional, temporal, and conditional relative sentences is shown by the following table. So what this chart gets at is the fact that when I say, if ever I have money, I give it to my girlfriend. That's a conditional. I can also say temporal. Whenever I have money, I give it to my girlfriend. Or I can say, whatever money I have, I give it to my girlfriend. Okay, I'm a stupid guy. Now, the fact that a conditional or a temporal or a conditional relative, they all are ruled by the same, array and organization of tenses and moods. This means that learning this chart of conditionals goes a long way, and you'll see it all over the place in these various types of clauses: conditional, temporal, and relative. Okay? And, if you're like me, lucky enough to read Greek for 40 years, you'll get to the point where you really don't even have to think about these. You just read, and it's obvious what's going on. But, that's a very long road between where one is starting out and where one will get after 40 years of effort. Okay. So, again, good luck with your Greek. It's a truly Heraclean task to get into the bowels of Greek grammar. So just recognize that you are up against a Nemean lion, but the result is literary glory. Okay, have a good day, and I'll see you again soon. Time to walk the dog. Bye-bye.